let's bring on Abe Gordon now to talk about some of this. All right, so Abe Gordon comes to us from 92.9 The Game in Atlanta, where he covers the Bulldogs, the Falcons, I'm sure the Braves a little bit. So let me start by asking you this, Abe. What's the reception and, the narrative for Gunnar Stockton going into this season? Can he be a national championship worthy quarterback?
Yeah, I definitely think he can. And I also feel like the reception nationally versus locally, there's a slight difference. I think there's some hesitation here, but quite a lot of optimism locally about what Gunnar Stockton has. I think nationally, it's just hesitation. I don't think a lot of people see that this guy is a formerly highly recruited player that has been in the system for a long time and looked pretty good at times when he had to come in last year. Carson Beck got banged up once or twice. I think the key for Gunnar Stockton is you're not placing everything upon his shoulders. I just don't think you need to be necessarily a quarterback-led team. And you go back to when Stetson Bennett won 2 national championships. And look, Stetson was a great quarterback for the University of Georgia. But you look at what really won those games, it is the offensive line. It is the defensive line. If they can get back to having dominant fronts, which is something that Kirby Smart has worked all offseason in getting his guys to understand, it's not about the running backs, not about the receivers. I know we don't have Brock Bowers at tight end. Dominate the front on both sides of the ball. We're going to still win this game. And so I think for Gunnar Stockton and Chelsea, that term game manager, some people respect it. Some people hate it. They think it's annoying. Just don't lose the game if you're Gunnar Stockton, and this team's got a real good shot to make the playoffs and see what happens from there.
What is the level of confidence then, Abe, in that offensive front in particular? I think only one returning starter on the offensive line. Look, it's Georgia. They're used to replacing guys even when they lose 14 draft choices. It's just part of the program and part of life for Kirby Smart, like you said. But do they have a high level of confidence? I know Stockton's more mobile than Beck, obviously, but do they have a high level of confidence that if the line doesn't hold up, he's not going to make some of those mistakes?
Yeah, I think they do. And you're returning Drew Bobo there at center, which if you're going to return one, that's probably as important as can be. I think the fascinating thing is you look at what's going on across the NFL now, and you see guys that have left Georgia's offensive line recently make waves in camp, guys that you maybe didn't expect. Tate Ratledge is fighting for a starting position. I think that they are one of the squads that reloads instead of rebuilds. And I think that your tackle in Ernest Green on the right side is outstanding. I think he's going to get talked about as one of the best right tackles in all of college football. So I think you feel pretty good about what you have on the offensive line. And like you said, they've shipped guys to the NFL year by year by year on the offensive line, and there's always someone young, big, fast, strong that's ready to step in there. I think they feel pretty good. But I'll tell you what, there has been real determination in camp to get physical. They felt at times they weren't good enough in the run game offensively, starting with the offensive line. And that has been really pushed and focused by Kirby Smart and the offensive staff. And I think they're going to respond in kind. I think it's going to be a big rebound year for the Georgia run game, which is not something we've had since like 2017 or 2018.
All right, so let's talk about the other side of the football and the defense, because this year especially it feels, well, every year obviously it's how you match up against the contenders if you're trying to win a national championship. And at the head of the class, we have some really quarterback-driven teams. You have Arch Manning in Texas, which obviously we don't know too much what to expect. But the hype is real. He is the favorite to win the Heisman. Garrett Nussmeier in LSU. Drew Aller in Penn State, even though I know that's probably going to be a running back-driven team. So how is this defense, and how do you think it matches up against elite-level offenses?
Yeah, I think we've seen a shift over the last decade in college football, kind of like we've seen in the NFL, where it's more about how you defend the pass. And I think this is a team maybe has some questions in how they can stop the run, but I think they are built right now to defend the pass. You look on the backside, it's led by Dalen Everett and KJ Bolden in the secondary. I think you've got an incredible group of linebackers led by CJ Allen, but Daniel Harris and Raylan Wilson there too. I think your back seven are really good. Now it's going to be about affecting the quarterback, that front four. Mykel Williams off to the NFL. Jalen Walker off to the NFL. Who's going to step up? For me, I think that guy is Christian Miller on the inside. If he comes to play and if some of the outside rushers come to play, I think it's going to be very good. But I think they are set up very well. And you mentioned Penn State, maybe not the greatest matchup against Penn State because of what they can provide, as you mentioned, in the run game. I think they're a great matchup, though, against Arch Manning, who's going to look to throw the ball, against Garrett Nussmeier, who's going to look to throw the ball. I think those are fascinating matchups because of what they can bring on the back end, more so than in recent years compared to the front end.
Abe, when you look at the schedule, the biggest games are somewhat spaced out, and relatively speaking, compared to other SEC schedules, it is somewhat soft. Which one do Georgia fans have circled on the calendar? I mean, week 3, got to go to Knoxville, although there's questions about what Tennessee is going to look like. Obviously, the Bama game a couple weeks after that, getting them at home is big. Outdoor cocktail party against Florida, there's always a chance that you jump up and get surprised by the Gators. And then Texas late in the year. Which one do Bulldogs fans look at and say, that's the one we got to have?
Yeah, and the good news compared to last year is all these big games are at home. Texas is at home. Alabama is at home. Obviously, a neutral site there for Florida and a neutral site for Georgia Tech. I think it's the Alabama game. I think they want a little bit of get back from getting jumped on early last year. And I know that game ended up being good, and Ryan Williams went nuts in the fourth quarter, and that game was that. Georgia just takes it to Texas for whatever reason. They got him twice last year, including in the SEC title game. Now they get him at home. I think they're definitely licking their chops to get their hands on Arch Manning and kind of be like, hey, this is still our conference. But I think it's that Alabama game. I do not think that Georgia handled that loss well. I think they've been sitting on it for a year. They get them back at home, and I think they're ready to chomp on them.
Talent level, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you've been covering the team for quite a while. Where does this team stand? Like, do you have confidence that this team is a national championship contender? Or do you say, hey, like, we have a good team, but it's not our best team in, like, the last 5 years?
Right. And obviously it's going to be tough to compare to the two national championship teams. You had so much first-round talent, especially on the defensive front. But you also had Brock Bowers, who's one of the 3 best tight ends in the NFL now, in my opinion, much less what he was in college football at the time. Stetson Bennett, while and we're kind of starting to see it develop a little bit with the Rams now, he wasn't the greatest player of all time, but he had that ability to come up big in certain moments. And I think that was important for his legacy. I think this is fascinating, Chelsea, because you've got a squad that essentially has no projected first-round picks. And I just think that's nonsense. I think there's going to be guys. It's Kirby Smart. Like, what are we doing here? Of course he's going to have first-round picks on this squad. I think what's interesting is this is probably, in my opinion, the best receiving core that Kirby has had. And they don't have a guy like Brock Bowers. I think as a group, though, this is the most explosive group of guys that they have had. I think that is going to play itself up this season. I think you're going to see Gunnar Stockton unleash the ball a little bit. It's going to help the run game as well because you have to defend like that. No, it's not their most talented team, but I think there might be strength in areas they didn't previously had strength in that cost them games. It certainly did a year ago, led the nation in drop passes. I think the receiving core comes up big for Georgia. I think they're real contenders if Gunnar Stockton develops and, as you mentioned, it can play mistake-free football in those big games.
Big Ten has won the last 2 national championships, Abe, and Penn State is being talked about as a possibility, obviously, this year to make it 3 in a row with 3 different teams winning the national championship from the Big Ten. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. The SEC definitely feels deeper, though. Is there a chance that there's any kind of cannibalization factor this year in the SEC where teams pick each other off and it maybe thins the playoff field out a year after people were making an argument for those teams on the border of the playoff? Bama, South Carolina last year, and the SEC Big Ten balance of power shifts maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, I think because you have such a large playoff field that any real semblance of cannibalization kind of still goes away. I think you have an opportunity. If you're 9-3, depending on who the losses are to and what they look like, you're still probably getting in. I think you had a couple of odd scenarios last year across college football that also presented themselves, SMU running through. I think, if anything, the ACC's got to potentialize cannibalization of themselves, Clemson aside, of course. So I think it's the same discussion where the ACC may not be getting 3 teams in or 2 teams in. They may be down to 1. And, some of the other conferences I just don't think are anywhere close to as top heavy as they were last year in the discussion. So I don't think so. I think you're going to see the cream rise to the top. And there's probably 4 or 5 SEC teams that are going to be making legitimate, serious claims to being in the playoffs. I think certainly Texas and Georgia are at least 2 of those 5. I think then you've got a group of like Alabama and LSU, South Carolina, and maybe outside shots with like Ole Miss and Florida. But I think it'll be pretty obvious by the time we're 12 games into this season who the real threats are and who aren't.